Hi, everyone. Martin has been to Seoul, you've heard that. With the kind support of the IMP AG, with Karin Wiederkehr here, we've launched the GenA Alumni Travel Grant for the first year. Applications are still open until June 16. I'll share a slide in the end again with the QR code. We'll start.
Yep, so thanks so much everybody for attending, and thanks so much Serena and everyone for organizing. My talk and my proposal had a very long title, and likewise I was asked to talk for 10 minutes and I prepared way too much material, so I hope I'm not rushing too much, and if I am, I hope I'm not boring you. But I liked the concept used in advertising this talk. The on-the-ground part is a short summary of what this is all about. So I'll try to do the same today and try to compress everything that I'm thinking into a few words like that. So you already heard plenty about me, so I don't think I need to talk about myself too much. But essentially, I'm an engineer with a background in urban energy systems and building technologies. And at the time I did GenA in 2020, I was still in Switzerland doing my PhD. After that, I stayed in Singapore for a few years, as you heard. And while I was in Singapore, I kept working on this project where we wish we had good urban scale data sets. And I saw what they had in Seoul, and I was like, wow, these guys have so much information. Would be nice to work on that. And that's kind of how this project ended up coming up. And I was fortunate to have this supported by a GenA travel grant, which allowed me to go to Seoul for a couple months. And currently, as you heard, I'm now in Delft, unfortunately no longer in Asia, but you'll hear also a little bit about what I'm currently doing with the experience that I collected in Korea. So just to give a background what my work over the past couple of years has been about, essentially our cities are heating up, right? Both due to climate change, but also extreme weather events, the way we construct. And we have competing challenges because we need on the one hand to reduce our CO2 emissions to avoid climate change, but also we need to recognize the reality that climate change already exists and it's affecting people's health and well-being. So we need to also provide buildings that support the needs of these building occupants. So the question in my research is, how can we support both in the built environment? At the same time, we have the proliferation of terms like smart cities, and we hear more and more about data, large-scale data initiatives. And the example you see here is actually probably the most famous one in the world, which is the Songdo International City in Korea, which is a very famous case study or example of a smart city. But if you Google it, and this is not cherry-picked, this is like 5 out of the first 8 headlines I found when I Googled Songdo International City, it's kind of also questioned how successful this experience has been, because it's essentially not very attractive for the people attending, for the people who should be wanting to live there and carry out their lives there. And essentially the human perspective has kind of been missing in these types of initiatives. So in my work, as I mentioned, I was working with these large-scale data sets, and I saw that we have in Seoul tremendously large urban data sets to support decision-making. But as I mentioned, we're losing a little bit of the occupant or the building occupant or the urban dweller perspective. And the question was, okay, how can we integrate that? Can we just ask people how they feel? What's their perception of the environment in order to take this into consideration into planning, urban scale interventions? So what I did was I developed this data set combining both the urban scale data sets collected in Seoul with surveys conducted through smartwatch application, as well as some other sources of data that you'll hear about in a moment, in order to get a combination of the urban context that led to people perceiving their urban environment a certain way, and what are the reasons that people are perceiving the urban environment that way. So what I did was I stayed 2 months in Seoul, October and November last year, visiting Chungang University in Seoul, South Korea. And if you're wondering why South Korea, I'm probably blocking your view. There was 2 main motivations, 3 if you count me wanting to practice my Korean. But the other 2 was that actually South Korea is the #1 country in Asia in terms of open data availability. And it's also one of the most digitally skilled populations in the world. So the assumption was that it was going to be relatively easy to recruit participants who would be willing to participate in this kind of study. So what was this urban scale data set that I mentioned that we're collecting. So we have openly available in Seoul information about every single building in Seoul in terms of geometries, materials, and so on. And we also have parcel level building energy demand data. As I mentioned, I'm a building energy and building systems nerd, so that's kind of the kind of thing that gets me excited about a project. We have parcel level energy demand data for 10 years at a monthly scale for gas and electricity. So it's a wealth of information for the type of work that I'm interested in carrying out. And we also have 1,000+ weather sensors distributed throughout the city. So we have a really high temporal resolution information of what the urban climate in the city of Seoul looks like. This I also coupled with satellite imagery in order to get the surface temperatures in the city, which affect occupant comfort perception in cities. And I did this in collaboration with Professor Yoo-Jin Park at Chungang University, who was gracious enough to host me and help me out in getting into this topic. From the occupant side, which is kind of maybe the more exciting or the more relatable side of it, what I did was I recruited test participants in the university who would be willing to wear a smartwatch over a time period and provide us information about their environment. So we ended up, we asked them to wear the smartwatch on weekdays during working hours, 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. for 4 to 6 weeks. And you see an example here of what an onboarding looked like. So the reason why I'm showing that and purposefully blurring people's faces and everything is obviously because I don't want you guys to know who this was, but also because we were also working with data privacy limitations. So we made sure nobody's personal records were attached to any survey responses. And actually we recruited 14 people who owned their own Apple Watch, but we couldn't recruit. We didn't have enough participants who owned their own watch, so we loaned some of them a smartwatch to carry out during this period. And for this, I again was lucky to count with the collaboration of Professor Clayton Miller at the National University of Singapore, who not only his team develops the application that we use for these surveys and also loaned out the smartwatches. So just some basic demographics, fun facts. About 3/4 of our participants turned out to be females. I don't know if that's, maybe smartwatches are more popular with females in Korea than males. And the vast majority were Koreans, which is not surprising since Chungang University is quite a local university. So we asked our participants to fill out hourly micro-surveys on things like their location, activity, thermal comfort preference, and so on over this entire period. We had English version and Korean versions of the surveys. Unsurprisingly, the majority preferred to use the Korean version, which was fine and acceptable. And we also collected their location from the smartwatch, so we could tell in this campus how people were moving, and try to infer why a person how people find their way on campus and how they choose their spaces. If they spend time outdoors, what's the features of that area that make them want to stay there, kind of. And we also had health kit data from the Apple Watch that gives us information also of how the people were how physiologically feeling at the time. So if they were very hot, is it because their heart rate was up? Were they like jogging or something and therefore they felt hot? Or was it some other reason? So on. At the end, the experiment would finish when a person conducted at least 100 surveys, but we offered them to stay for a little bit longer. And at the end, once they finished, we provided them compensation for their time and participation. So the surveys, this is a not very visual graph now that I see it, showing you what kind of questions we're asking. So there was a question flow where they would first be asked if they're outdoors or indoors, what they were doing, where they were, what they were doing before, whether they adapted their environment in any way to make themselves more comfortable, their clothing level, their thermal preference, too hot, too warm, too cold, just fine, and their mood. And yeah, one more. We ended up collecting 3,200 surveys, the vast majority indoors. Unsurprisingly, we spend most of our time indoors. The vast majority, not the vast majority, but the majority studying. So majority were students, so it's unsurprising that they would be studying most of the time, but we see that there's a distribution of different places where people study. So part of our motivation was to challenge the idea that you work in an office, you study in a classroom, so on. So we see some combinations that you wouldn't expect up front. Most of the time they reported no activity change and also no change in location. So people were kind of consistent in where they were staying. But they did report a lot of adaptive comfort measures, like changing their clothes to make themselves more comfortable and so on. This one's not so interesting, maybe next one. Most of the time, they reported they would rather not change their environment. So actually, this was a result of a very mild October in Seoul. So unfortunate for us to get exciting results, but it's reality. And the good thing for Chungang University, basically no surveys, only a few said that they were feeling a negative mood. So Chungang University students, very happy. If you need somebody, recommend them a university in Korea, Chungang University. So we see now just some samples. This is all just to show you kind of what the data looks like in the end. So the location is referenced all over Korea. So we see, for example, random irrelevant facts. Somebody went to Jeju for vacation, apparently. Somebody went to the beach for vacation as well. So, but at Seoul scale, it gives us a bit more information of how people move, which arteries they prefer, and which ways they move around. And if you go specifically to Dongjaku, which is the district where the university is located at, we start getting more information about wayfinding, as I mentioned before, where we start seeing these points where we can see how people move in an open space like that. And then even more specifically, if we look at their thermal responses, you see we have a distribution of where people were when they said that they were feeling too cold or too warm and so on. And the vast network of weather stations that is available in order to infer, okay, which environmental characteristics might have led them to give that answer. So at the end, we have, as I mentioned, a lot of data that I collected while I was there. And the question is, cool data, what do you do about that now? And if you want to know more, there's a very nice paper. I can recommend you attend the conference in Helsinki in June. But since I doubt that there's many building simulation nerds around in this room, I'll just give you a short summary now on the next slide. So on the one hand, as I mentioned, what we're interested in seeing is which features of the city lead to these microclimates that are created in an urban scale. Which features lead to urban hotspots forming or affecting comfort preference from people, and therefore their decisions, such as their decision to walk somewhere versus taking public transportation, or how much time they spend indoors on a day or another, or whether they stay outside in a specific area of the city. What are the features that best lead to that? Also, since I mentioned I'm a building energy person, the other interesting aspect is also to see how the urban climate affects then building energy performance throughout the city of Seoul. So we can compare which parameters of urban form affect the urban climate most, and therefore which affect the building performance most. And therefore, if a planner looks at this information and tries to replicate these features, like if they find which features are most conductive to a comfortable environment or to good building energy performance, they can then test it in urban simulations. So this is actually kind of what the core of my research is in urban simulations. And this is an example of a model that I created for the Chungang University campus, where presumably a planner who proposes then certain interventions to improve performance as well as comfort could then test these in a simulated way. And ultimately, as I mentioned, the goal is to provide tools for urban planners and other decision makers to make decisions that support building energy efficiency and occupant comfort and well-being. I just have one final slide. 2 months goes by very, very quickly, and you saw it. I'm now in the Netherlands, so you might be wondering, so what, did that stay in Korea, or did you bring it with you? And actually, it's somewhere in between, because right now I'm collaborating with my collaborators in Singapore and Korea. We're writing a proposal to extend this project, hopefully further, for a few years, supported by AI Singapore. So hopefully we can further work on this topic in a more extended way, and learn from what I did over those 2 months to do it better next time. So actually, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Martin. Because it wasn't mentioned in the presentation, and maybe to give us a sense of what the output is from your work, it's around twin models, right? Can you quickly tell us what they are, how they are used, and what application there is to them.
So my whole project in Singapore was focused on so-called urban digital twins. And a digital twin, by definition, is just a model that replicates reality, that gets updated as if you model a table, if the table starts getting old, your model should also follow the aging of the table, for example. And they're quite popular in urban studies because they provide a lot of access to information, both about present events as well as possible future events in a simulated way to allow, stakeholders, people, planners, anyone who's interested to, on the one hand, access publicly available information such as building energy performance, as I mentioned on the one hand, but also to see in a simulated way how future changes might affect that performance. So for example, in my project in Singapore, we tested what would happen due to climate change in terms of building system performance and things like that. So these are the kind of applications that I look into in urban digital twins. There are further, other people use them for, emergency response, public participation, many other aspects. So they're just a good tool to integrate all of these perspectives so that it's not just the energy modeler speaking, but also stakeholders, planners, emergency responders, and everyone else.
And can you tell us a bit what's up with Seoul? I mean, where does all the data richness come from? Do you know anything, thoughts that went into that kind of policy? Was it actually that easy to access all this public data?
The number one restriction to accessing this data was creating a username for every single website and really bad APIs. So it was all technical issues. It's not, it wasn't a matter of asking the right person or anything like that, because it's really a government driven policy. So there's an interest in making this data publicly accessible. Both for information, but also for accountability in a way. So if your building is performing really poorly, it's good. It's in the public interest for other people to know this as well. So this is really a government-driven policy, and it's a fantastic database online that you can access freely. Any one of you has access to it, with the caveat that you're going to have to create a lot of usernames in Korean. But that was the highest limitation. It's not a matter of asking politely or anything like that.
And you touched upon data security already. Is that a big topic in South Korea? And I mean, speaking of the pandemic, we knew that it was tracking people with credit cards and everything, and we thought in Europe most of the time, is that legal?
Yeah, I honestly, I spent 10 years in Switzerland before, so I'm much from my perspective is much more from the European side than the Korean one maybe. But in my experience, what I noticed is that people were not concerned about data security or data privacy as much as we are here. So for example, one of the key aspects is that we have, for our ethical review, we had to produce a lot of documents informing people what data was going to be collected, how it's going to be used, all the usual things. And at the end, they were given a form where they agreed to the various points that we're requesting from them. And not a single there was one section where they had to mark consent or do not consent. Not a single participant marked it before signing. So nobody was actually reading the form before signing it. So it doesn't seem to be as much of a priority as it is maybe for us in Europe.
And you've collaborated with a South Korean professor and her researchers. How did that go? Was that something new to you? And were there other fields that you just merged into for a first time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in Singapore, actually, funnily enough, you saw Clayton Miller was one of the people that I was collaborating with on a daily basis. The other one was a Belgian guy. So my environment was quite international. That's not the case at Chungang University. In Chungang University, I don't think there's a single non-Korean professor in the entire department. So it's very much a Korean environment. And the work style was visibly very different too. Now when I came back to the Netherlands and everybody was leaving the office at 5 p.m., it felt very early to me. My professor there, the professor was staying until midnight in the office. So it is a very different work environment for sure. But at the same time, I also had an opportunity to learn a little bit more about the kind of topics that they were working there, because I was actually visiting the Department of Urban Planning, which is not really my background. It's something that I'm interested in, but it's not what my work is about. And the kind of methods they use and the kind of questions they ask are sometimes radically different to the ones we ask. So speaking of sustainability, for example, for the questions before, you ask me about sustainability, I go and tell you, look at all this data, we can develop more energy efficient buildings. And I met a master's student in this group that I was visiting who was really interested in the social side. And she was saying like, no, Seoul, Seoul has its own issues that maybe you're not interested in socially, that you don't know about. So in all these things, I learned a lot from, not only for my field, but also for other aspects within the context of Seoul.
And you've alluded to it now. What happens to the data now exactly? Is it staying with you?
So far, it's staying with me. Every single participant consented to an anonymized version of the data being published. So once the study is over, it could be made freely available for, there's online repositories for open data also for these kinds of comfort-related questions and so on. So in principle, it could be opened up and made available for other researchers. But for the time being, since it's still quite preliminary, the paper that I showed is still kind of showing the use cases, not the results. For now, it's locked in a vault with me. And then we'll see what we do with it long term. But like I said, the main thing for me, the privacy part was more important than for my participants, apparently. And we made sure that, the participant and their personal details were not connected in any way. So it's all fully anonymized and cleaned up that way.
And how happy are you with the data set? Is there something you would do differently next time?
Well, it's a question of if I have more resources like smartwatches and so on, it would be interesting to ask more than 22 people, obviously. It would be interesting to ask people who are not students, because students, every single one of my participants was born after 1990. I felt very old. I'm from before 1990. So it would be good to include people from more diverse backgrounds, include a wider range of participants. But for the limited, so for the demonstrator phase that I carried out, I'm very happy with what we did, especially given the limited amount of time. The only thing that failed us, like I said, was that we wanted to see the period of time where Seoul suddenly becomes very, very cold within like a week. And that was delayed by like a month last year. So really the weather was fine the entire time of the study. We didn't get any extreme heat or extreme cold, but it's reality. So next time, maybe extend the time period and extend the number of participants.
And maybe to close with a personal question, I mean, our lives are getting more data heavy by the day. Are there some measures that you're taking for yourself that you would recommend me or?
I'm not a proselytist by nature, so I don't tend to like go try to convince people of stuff very often. So it's hard for me, but I'm not going to do a cop out and not say anything. I think the important thing is to always keep in mind the purpose and of the data collection and the consent. So if you're okay with giving up your data for a certain purpose, then I would say go for it. It's up to you. I personally tend to be the kind of person that's always logged off of every single, Google Maps, App Store and everything on my phone because I don't want to be tracked and so on. But I do use Gmail and I use WhatsApp, so Google, Facebook. So I'm still being tracked anyway, but I'm kind of like accepting the result of me wanting to stay connected with my friends via WhatsApp means I need to give up some data. Okay, I'm okay with that level, but not further than that. So it's still kind of a cop-out, but I do what I can up to the extent that I'm comfortable with.
I think then I'm good as well. Got it covered. You will stay on stage. We will ask all speakers on stage in a minute, but let me quickly pitch the Gen A Alumni Travel Grant. You've seen that there's many things possible. It's open for application only for the Gen A alumni, so you. It offers a fixed sum of 10,000 francs to spend 6 to 12 weeks in Asia. The project is really open, as it's usual at GenA and Asia Society Switzerland. For this year, we endorse applications to emerging economies in Asia, and we discourage South Korea. Sorry, that was taken by Martin, just to get some diversity in there. The deadline is June 16. If you have any questions about the projects or the timeline or anything, you can ask Martin, Karin, or me. We're still around, or go to the website. Thank you.